You already know the basics. You know she was taken from her home. You know the letters arrived. You know there were Bitcoin demands. You know there were deadlines. You have been watching this case since the beginning, following every update, waiting for something to shift. And for 2 months the conversation around those original ransom letters kept circling the same talking points. The millions demanded. The deadlines that came and went. The FBI involvement. The wave of skeptics insisting none of it was real. But there was something inside those first 2 letters, the ones sent to 3 media outlets in the days after Nancy disappeared, that nobody ever put on the record publicly. The FBI knew it from the moment they read those letters. The journalists who received them knew it. And the question of whether those letters were real or fabricated looks entirely different once you know what was actually inside them. For 2 months and change, across every cable segment, every podcast episode, every forum thread, every YouTube video covering this case, one specific material fact about those original letters was never disclosed. Not once. Not anywhere. Until a veteran journalist with 36 years of experience said it out loud on her podcast. Clearly. On the record. Attributed correctly. The original 2 ransom letters that the FBI believes came from the actual kidnappers of Nancy Guthrie contained an explicit written threat to kill her if the demands were not met. Not an or else that could be interpreted multiple ways. Not a vague implication buried in the language. A stated threat. Written down. Mailed to the press. And kept out of the public record for more than 2 months. Tonight we are walking through the complete picture. Not because the basics are new to you. You already know this case. But because once you understand the full architecture of those notes, where they went, when they arrived, how the FBI connected them to each other, what the Bureau concluded about them, and specifically what they said inside, the entire read on what happened to Nancy Guthrie changes. Hit that like button right now. Share this video immediately because this development is the most significant confirmed update to the Nancy Guthrie investigation in weeks and this community needs to see it. Subscribe to Black Veil Crime Files with notifications on because in a case moving this fast you cannot afford to miss a single update. And stay until the very last second of this video because the 2 threads of this story converge at the end into something that demands your complete attention. Let us start with the map. 4 categories of communication, and why most people conflated them. Before we get to what was revealed on day 65 you need a clear map of the communication landscape in this case. Because it has become genuinely difficult to follow. And the difficulty is not accidental. It is the natural result of an environment where legitimate signal has been consistently surrounded by fraudulent noise. There are 4 broadly distinct categories of communication that have entered this investigation. They are not all from the same source. They are not all authentic. And conflating them, treating them as a single undifferentiated mass, is exactly the kind of analytical mistake that leads people to dismiss the wrong things. The first category is the 2 original physical ransom letters. These are the ones sent to 3 media outlets in the early weeks after Nancy disappeared. These are the communications we are focused on tonight. They are the ones the FBI took most seriously from the very beginning and they are the ones at the center of what was revealed on day 65. The second category is the text messages sent directly to family members, specifically to members of Nancy's immediate circle. Those texts were traced. A California man was arrested and charged with extortion in connection with those messages. He was not a kidnapper. He was a scammer who identified an opportunity in a high-profile missing persons case and attempted to exploit it. That channel has been addressed by law enforcement and must be understood as entirely separate from the original letters. His arrest did not speak to the authenticity or inauthenticity of the original 2 ransom notes in any way. The third category is the series of emails sent to a major entertainment outlet by a persistent anonymous sender starting around February 11, 2026. This person has sent multiple messages over time making contradictory claims. Asserting at various points that Nancy is alive in the Mexican state of Sonora. And then in direct contradiction claiming that Nancy is dead and offering to provide the location of her body for half a Bitcoin. The sender demanded payment in cryptocurrency in exchange for information. No Bitcoin was transferred to the wallet address associated with these communications, which is itself a signal that investigators weigh when evaluating the legitimacy of any ransom demand. The fourth category is the general ambient noise of a nationally covered case. Tips, social media claims, speculation, and opportunism. It generates heat but not light. Tonight we are focused exclusively on the first category. The original two letters. Because that is where the actual story has been living all along. What arrived and what the scene established. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old when she disappeared. She was last seen at her home in the Catalina foothills area just outside Tucson, Arizona on January 31, 2026 and was reported missing the following morning, February 1. The Pima County Sheriff's Department responded and the FBI joined the investigation quickly. A move that signaled from the earliest stages that law enforcement was treating this as a kidnapping and not a voluntary disappearance. The physical evidence at the scene supported that framing. Blood was found on Nancy's front porch. Doorbell camera footage captured a masked man at her front door on the night she disappeared. The doorbell camera itself had been physically removed from the wall. The back doors of her home were propped open. Her phone, her purse, her medication, her shoes were all left behind. Law enforcement was not publicly hedging. They believed she had been taken. Then the letters arrived. The first letter was sent simultaneously to 3 media outlets. All 3 received the same communication. One of those outlets forwarded it directly to the FBI on the same day it arrived. The beginning of what would become an active working relationship between that outlet and federal investigators throughout this case. The letter contains several elements that were reported publicly at the time. A Bitcoin demand described as substantial, in the millions. A verified Bitcoin wallet address. A deadline. An or else element. And critically, specific details about Nancy that had not been made public. References to what she was wearing at the time of her disappearance and to something that had been damaged inside or around her home. That last element is important. In any kidnapping investigation, the detail that distinguishes an authentic communication from a fabricated one is often the presence of information that only the kidnappers could know. Details that were not in the news. That were not on social media. That could not be gleaned from any public reporting. When a ransom note contains accurate unpublicized personal details about the victim, investigators sit up straighter. That is not a guarantee of authenticity. But it is a marker. And the original letter had it. The second letter came later and it went exclusively to a single local Tucson television station. Not to the other 2 outlets. Not to the entertainment outlet that had been working with the FBI. Just to that one station. 2 letters. Different distribution strategies. One narrowing down from 3 recipients to 1. And both letters contained the same Bitcoin wallet address. The Bitcoin fingerprint and what the FBI found. In any financial investigation involving cryptocurrency, and in any kidnapping case where Bitcoin has been used as a demand vehicle, the wallet address is the closest thing investigators have to a forensic anchor. Bitcoin addresses are generated cryptographically and are unique. When 2 separate communications sent at different times and to different recipients reference the identical Bitcoin address, you are looking at 2 letters that came from the same source. That is not an inference or an interpretation. That is how the technology works. The same Bitcoin address appeared in both letters. The first communication reached all 3 outlets simultaneously. A wide broadcast. The kind of move you make when you want to guarantee that the message lands somewhere. The second communication went only to 1 local station. A narrowing. A targeting. A different approach. Both from the same wallet. Both from the same person or group. The significance of the Bitcoin address extended beyond linking the 2 letters to each other. The address also gave the FBI something concrete to investigate. When law enforcement receives a letter with a specific Bitcoin wallet embedded in it, they can examine the blockchain, which is by design a public and permanent record of all transactions. They can look at the wallet's history, its patterns of activity, any threads that might hint at who controls it. They can attempt to trace the origin of the wallet itself. This is sophisticated forensic work, and the FBI has dedicated resources for exactly this kind of cryptocurrency investigation. Here is what the senior journalist working closest to the FBI in this case said publicly on the record about the results of that effort. The FBI pursued every available investigative avenue to trace the source of those original letters. They used the Bitcoin address. They analyzed the digital elements of the communications. They ran down every forensic thread they had. And they came up completely dry. In the world of cryptocurrency investigation, this is not a common outcome against a determined federal law enforcement effort. It means someone with at least a working knowledge of digital anonymization, of how Bitcoin wallets can be configured to resist identification, of how to communicate through media channels without creating an easily traceable footprint, was behind these letters. The combination of digital communication and cryptocurrency had created, in this specific case, a trail that even the full resources of the FBI could not follow to its origin. Those letters still exist. The people who sent them have never been identified. Savannah's statement and what she said about the first two letters. On April 6, 2026, Savannah Guthrie returned to her anchor desk for the first time since her mother disappeared. She had been away for more than 2 months, stepping back from one of the most visible jobs in American television journalism to manage a situation that no public figure should ever have to navigate in the full glare of national media. She spoke about her family. She thanked viewers for their support. And then she addressed the ransom notes directly. On live television. With the nation watching. She acknowledged clearly that the majority of communications that had circulated around her mother's disappearance were not genuine. The fraudulent texts. The noise. The opportunists who had inserted themselves into a missing persons case to exploit a family's grief. She was precise about all of that. But she made a distinction. She said she believed the 2 notes that her family received and responded to were real. That sentence is doing precise and important work. She was not talking about the April 6 emails. She was not talking about the fraudulent texts. She was talking specifically about the original 2 letters. The ones the family was notified about. The ones to which they responded. The ones with the Bitcoin address. The ones with the deadlines. The ones the FBI received on the day they arrived. She said she believed they were real. The language she used was deliberately careful. She is not a law enforcement official. She does not have access to the full investigative file. She cannot speak with the authority of the FBI. But she is the daughter of a missing 84-year-old woman. She is the person whose family was told to respond to these letters and who did so. Whatever was inside those letters, including the detail that was never publicly disclosed, Savannah Guthrie had enough information to stand in front of a national audience and say the first 2 were real. That is a meaningful statement from the most personally invested source in this entire case. What the public knew, and the gap that was never filled. Here is a precise account of what was publicly confirmed about the original 2 letters before the Day 65 podcast episode. Everything that had made it into public reporting. Everything the audience had been given to work with. The public knew there were Bitcoin demands. A specific substantial amount described as being in the millions to a specific verified Bitcoin address. The public knew there was a deadline. The public knew there was an or else element described in coverage but not in full detail. The public knew the notes contained specific unpublicized personal details about Nancy, details about what she was wearing and about something damaged at her home. The public knew the FBI was actively involved in treating the case as a serious kidnapping. The public knew a second letter had gone exclusively to one local television station. That was the sum of what had been formally confirmed. It was a real and meaningful body of information. But it was not complete. Because what was never confirmed in any outlet, on any podcast, in any press statement, was that those letters contained an explicit stated threat to kill Nancy Guthrie if the ransom demands were not met. That element was always there. It was in the letters when they arrived. The FBI read it. The journalists who received the letters knew it. And for more than 2 months of intense national coverage, of podcasts and cable segments and forum debates and YouTube videos covering every angle of this case, this specific material fact had not been disclosed publicly. Not once. Not anywhere. The reveal, what was in those letters from the beginning. Ashley Banfield has 36 years of experience in journalism. She does not approach active investigations as an opportunity for speculation. Her podcast had built its credibility on her willingness to make precise distinctions between what is confirmed and what is alleged, between what sources say and what facts establish, between noise and signal. When she opened Day 65 by saying she had learned something she had not known before, that framing was deliberate and meaningful. It was her way of communicating to her audience that she was about to share something verified through a reliable source. Not a rumor from an anonymous tip. She had learned it from the journalist who had been working hand in hand with the FBI throughout this case from the moment the first letter arrived. That journalist had been sitting on this detail through his working relationship with federal investigators, and he shared it with Banfield. And she said it clearly, the way journalists say things they know to be true. The original 2 letters threatened to kill Nancy Guthrie. We had not heard that until now. Let that sit for a moment. The original 2 ransom letters, the ones the FBI believes are real, the ones Savannah believes are real, the ones that contain unpublicized personal details about Nancy Guthrie, the ones with the verified Bitcoin address, the ones with a deadline, the ones that the FBI received in real time and then traced as far as their resources would allow. Those letters explicitly threatened to kill Nancy Guthrie if the demands were not met. This was not a vague implication. It was not an or else that the audience was left to interpret for themselves. It was a stated threat. Written down. Sent to 3 media outlets in the city where Nancy was taken. And for more than 2 months of intense national coverage it had not been part of the public record. Why it was withheld, and why it matters that it was revealed now. There are legitimate and defensible reasons why specific details get withheld from public reporting in active kidnapping investigations. This practice is not unusual and it is not arbitrary. Law enforcement regularly asks media outlets to hold specific information during an active case. To protect the operational integrity of the investigation. To avoid alerting suspects to what investigators know. To preserve details that can later be used to evaluate the authenticity of future communications. To filter out fraudulent actors. That last function is particularly relevant here. If both original letters contained an explicit threat to kill Nancy Guthrie and that detail was not publicly known, then any future communication that also contained such a threat without being copied from existing media reporting would be a signal worth taking seriously. Any future communication that did not contain it could be evaluated differently. The withheld detail functions as a kind of authenticator. A filter. An investigative tool as much as a fact. It is also likely that part of the calculus involved protecting the investigation's ability to conduct communications without the public emotional pressure that comes with a confirmed death threat against an elderly woman becoming national news. When you are trying to locate a kidnapping victim and bring them home alive, the last thing law enforcement wants is for a confirmed explicit death threat to trigger a public panic that changes the behavior of everyone involved, including the suspects. So the withholding itself is understandable. Even if the revelation is jarring. What Banfield did on Day 65 was serve the public interest in a way that appears to be deliberately timed. The investigation has reached a point where the original notes have been analyzed. The FBI has attempted and failed to trace their source. The case remains open with no identified suspect. And the audience following this case deserves to understand the full weight of what was in those letters from the beginning. Where both threads converge. Here is where everything in this story comes together into something that demands your full attention. On one side you have the content of the original letters. They threatened to kill Nancy Guthrie. They contained unpublicized personal details about her. They had a verified Bitcoin address linking them to a single source. They had a deadline. They were sent to 3 media outlets in Tucson, and then a second letter went to just one of them. The FBI reviewed them, analyzed them, and concluded they were real. That they came from the actual kidnappers and not from scammers or opportunists or attention-seeking third parties. On the other side you have the results of the FBI's investigation into the source of those letters. They used the Bitcoin address. They analyzed every digital element. They ran down every forensic thread available to them. They came up completely dry. Hold both of those things together. Because that is the actual center of this story. The FBI believes the original 2 letters were written by the people who took Nancy Guthrie. Those letters contained a written threat to kill her. And the FBI, with the full weight of its investigative capacity applied directly to tracing those letters, cannot identify who wrote them. The people behind those letters had enough operational awareness about cryptocurrency, about digital anonymization, about how to communicate through media channels without leaving a traceable footprint, that even a federal investigation aimed directly at them produced nothing. They wrote a death threat against an 84-year-old woman. They mailed it to the press in 2 separate rounds. They demonstrated specific knowledge of their victims' personal details. And they have never been identified. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The investigation is ongoing. The family continues to hold out hope. A reward of $1 million remains active for any information that leads to her recovery. Additional reward funds are available through law enforcement directly. The death threat detail does not end this story. Nothing about this story has ended. But it fills in a gap that has been making it harder for this community to see clearly what we are actually looking at. This was not an uncertain, ambiguous ransom situation with demands and deadlines and maybe an or else. This was a written threat to kill Nancy Guthrie mailed to the press from people who appear to have known exactly what they were doing and who the FBI has been unable to identify. That is the picture. That is what was in those letters from the beginning. And that is what finally entered the public record. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, please contact the FBI directly or submit a tip through official channels. You can remain completely anonymous. A reward of $1 million is active. Leave a comment below right now and tell me what changes for you knowing the death threat was in those letters from the beginning. Does it change how you read the deadlines that came and went? Does it change how you understand the FBI's silence on the letters? Does it change how you feel about the 2 months that have passed since those letters arrived? Tell me what this does to your read on this case. Subscribe to Black Veil Crime Files with notifications on. Share this video immediately. This is the most significant confirmed update to the Nancy Guthrie investigation in weeks, and every person following this case needs to see it. This is Black Veil Crime Files. I will see you in the next one. Blackheart.